Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today, David. Please tell us your full name, a little bit about where you were born and grew up, and your family of origin.
My name is David Carlberg, and I was born in Los Angeles, California. Spent practically my whole life in Los Angeles and Avalon, Catalina, where I went to school. Went to Hamilton High School in Los Angeles, UCLA. Got a PhD at UCLA in microbiology. My family, my mother is from Boston, Massachusetts. My father is from Sweden.
Besides your doctorate in microbiology, what other degrees do you hold?
I have a bachelor's degree in bacteriology from UCLA.
And no master's?
No master's.
Why did you study chemistry and then microbiology?
Well, I've always been a nerd, I suppose, is the right term. I've always been interested in the science and mathematics from the very time I was knee-high, I guess. And started out as a chemistry major at UCLA, and I was having kind of problems with some of the classes. And so it was then, I think it was my senior year, I switched to bacteriology and got the degree in bacteriology. But I minored in chemistry. And I worked actually as a chemist for a couple of years after I graduated because I had enough chemistry behind me.
And why microbiology?
It seemed like a growing area, and I was very happy to make the decision as well because microbiology went into molecular biology, DNA, and all that sort of stuff. So it was a good choice on my part.
If you could advise someone in school now, maybe 14 years old, something like that, what would you tell them about studying a hard science degree?
I would very definitely tell them to do it because that's the future. All of our technology is based on science, whether it's chemistry or physics, microbiology, all of our future advances in medicine, for example, and
even computers.
Even computers, environmental problems are all based on science.
Why did you go into industry instead of staying in academia?
I had a couple of friends who had already started working at Douglas Aircraft after I got my PhD, and so I just automatically went in that direction. And then after when I got my bachelor's degree, I wasn't really ready for an advanced degree yet, so I started working as a chemist. I had been working as a chemist during the summers for 2 summers before that time, so I had an in for this particular company, Riker Laboratories, so I sort of just automatically went back to them and started working full-time.
Then you had some experience. Why did you then go back and teach?
Well, that's a long story too. I was working, as I say, as an organic chemist for Riker Labs, and they advanced me to an administrative position for Rexall Drug Company, which was their parent company. And I was head of the formula office for Rexall Drug, and it was boring. And so it was then that I saw the light and said, oh, I'm going to go back for an advanced degree. That's what I did. It was 2 years after I got my bachelor's.
And immediately after getting your PhD, you stayed in academia?
No, I worked for 2 years in industry, in the aerospace industry, and then went to Long Beach State and started teaching there.
I noticed from the paper you sent me that you've written a number of books and created a number of teaching aids. I assume you use those in your own classroom, is that correct?
Most of them, yes.
And were there other teachers both at your school and at other schools who used those study aids?
No, because I was teaching a very specialized course. I was the only one who taught the course. And so no one at my campus used my materials, but on other campuses around the country they did, yeah. My microbial genetics book, for example, was used by a number of campuses around the country.
As you know, there's a great controversy right now about genetically modifying foods.
That's right.
There's a big fight, a lot of people up in arms about the way Monsanto is behaving, what they're doing to farmers, suing everybody they can see. Not getting into the specifics of Monsanto and their fight, but should we be genetically modifying foods and other products, or are the risks of doing that too great?
As far as I know, there's been no scientific evidence that there are any significant risks involved in it. And the population of the world is becoming to the point now where we can't grow enough food for everyone. And so most of these genetically engineered plants have been designed to produce more protein, to produce more plant material.
To increase yield per acre.
Exactly. Whether it's corn or in the case of cotton, there's genetically engineered cotton that is resistant to insects, so more cotton can be produced for clothing and that sort of thing. So I think that a lot of this misunderstanding in genetic engineering, the genetic engineering of plants is overblown.
A moment ago, you just stated that there's not been any proof of potential problems from genetically modifying food and other farm products. Do you believe that that is a demonstration of the lack of danger?
No, of course not. There's continued research going on in determining the characteristic features of these genetically engineered plants and animals too, for that matter. And maybe someday they're going to discover. There have been some minor problems. For example, they have discovered that some of the plants have been engineered to resist insects. That characteristic has been spread to other plants close by, which might raise problems. So it's not an entirely clear picture, but so far there have been no significant effects, negative effects that have been discovered.
My understanding is that there was some crop, it could be cotton, I don't know which, that was genetically altered to decrease the likelihood of insects attacking the plant, and that this plant was planted in the path of those butterflies that migrate from Mexico to Canada each year.
Right.
And that many, many, many thousands, perhaps millions of these butterflies died. Do you see that as a problem?
I do. That's what I was alluding to, that what they've done is that they have engineered a toxin called Bacillus thuringiensis into the cotton plants, and that toxin is only affects members of the Lepidoptera, which are the insects, the butterflies and moths.
Which is what goes after cotton.
Which goes after cotton, right? But the monarch butterfly is also a member of the Lepidoptera, and so yes, if these butterflies attack these cotton plants, then they are affected as well. So that is one problem.
Can you think of a way that we can avail ourselves of the benefits of this technology without imperiling this precious species of the monarch butterflies?
Well, I suppose it might be possible to raise the bacteria that produce this toxin and modify genetically the toxin so it only goes after the cotton bollworm or whatever its target is, and avoid the effects on the monarch butterflies and other butterflies.
Going back to the question I asked a moment ago about whether a young person should study hard science, if that student asked you, David, what should I study? Which subject would you think would be the best one to direct them to?
Well, obviously, since I was a microbiologist, I would direct them to that area first, and then probably chemistry would be the second. Those are the two top of the list.
You think that's where the most opportunity is going forward?
Yes.
Is cloning possible and practical? And should we be doing it? And if we should be doing it, for what purposes should we be doing it?
Are you talking about plants or animals?
You tell me.
Well, there are a number of advantages, like I mentioned before. Our food supplies are becoming less and less adequate for the world population. And so I was just wondering whether if there's any way to improve our food supply through cloning, then certainly that is something that we should seriously consider.
What about animal cloning?
That's the same.
So if it would improve our chances to clone sheep or cows or chickens or what?
Yeah, cloning is not that practical in a lot of respects. It's more of a tool to produce animals with specific genetic traits if you want to do research in them. So if you're raising cattle for meat, as a general rule, it probably isn't practical. But in the future, if we find that the cows that we are raising aren't producing enough milk or to feed the world, or the goats aren't producing enough meat for consumption, then cloning certainly is a way to do it.
What should a layman need to know about the American Association for the Advancement of Science?
Well, that's an organization that not only deals with the scientists, but has an enormous program in public information. They publish a number of works for laymen with regards to, particularly for science issues in Washington, for example. They have lobbyists that spend a lot of time in Washington making sure that legislators are up to date as far as any scientific questions or issues that are occurring.
What was the earliest service project that you can remember being involved in your life?
I was involved in the Stevenson election campaign, if that counts.
And what year was that?
That was probably when he ran for president, about 1950, 53, 54, somewhere in there. And the only reason I was involved with that is because my fraternity brothers were, and they sort of pulled me in. Because I'm not the type that, at least at the time, I was not the type that joined those kinds of activities.
You're of service to a number of organizations now.
Yes.
If you had to pick one or two or three of them as being most central for you, which would they be?
Well, of course, the Amigos de Bolsa Chica is the one that I'm involved in the most now.
You have a sign for it in your front yard.
Exactly right.
But that's mostly from your wife, I think.
Yeah,
no?
Right, yeah, that was her idea. But that was almost a midnight raid. That was a sign that was left over from an office that we had many, many years ago, and it was still there. And so we went into the building there that owned the property and said, "Can we have the sign?" Say, "Sure, as long as you don't leave any holes." So that's how it ended up here.
And briefly tell us what Amigos de Bolsa Chica did and why that's important.
Well, back in the 1970s, the Bolsa Chica wetlands was being destined for being converted into another marina development very similar to Marina del Rey. And initially, we were concerned about what the social impact of such a development would have on the neighborhood. And and those of us, Margaret and I, for example, who lived in West LA for a long time, we were very familiar with the impact that Marina del Rey had to the neighborhood. And so that's the reason why we jumped in almost immediately and began to work with the organization to try and see what we could do to save the wetland.
And what ultimately happened?
Well, ultimately we won. Ultimately the wetland was set aside and is now restored. Not exactly to what it was exactly 200 or 300 years ago, but it is now a functioning wetland.
And what's the consequence of that for Joe Citizen driving by on the 405?
Well, there are a number of benefits of coastal wetlands that most people aren't aware of.
I was hoping you could briefly list those for us.
They protect you against floods. If you'll notice when you go to the Bolsa Chica, excuse me, you notice when you go to the Bolsa